This is Naco, and this is episode 3 of the Wolf Den podcast. I am joined once again by Zenitsu, and this episode we'll be discussing the pre-expectations of the BT7 meta. I guess the easiest way to begin would be to, reiterate the differences that should expect from our meta and the Japanese meta, and the easiest place to begin with that would be the restrictions. So why don't you start us off with that?
Yeah, so as of the BT7 meta, we have Mega Digimon Fusion banned. Then we have Ice Wall limited to one. And then on top of that, we have. What was the last card? I'm
Reinforced
already
memory
forgetting.
boost.
Oh, yeah, Reinforced Memory Boost, also limited to one. So the just general foundation of those impacts are going to definitely affect our meta just because, well, now Security Control and various other yellow decks don't have as good of generic recovery on top of a memory boost, on top of hand fixing. Then with blue, they actually have to change how they fundamentally play defense back to what they used to do, or somewhat used to do, just because now Ice Wall was a crutch in Japan in terms of their defense, and well, now we don't have that. And then as far as Mega Digimon Fusion, mid to late BT7 meta in Japan, they discovered they could use it and abuse it with Susanamon. So that definitely impacts how we're going to look at Susanamon and evaluate what we can do with that card.
I think that's a very accurate just overview of the descriptions of the restrictions, and like we all kind of know why Ice Wall is restricted. Anyone that's played BT6 against a Gabumon deck will know that Ice Wall is a problematic card. Like just the ability to stall incredibly cheaply, just free turn, build momentum, build board state. Understands that that card need to get restricted, and it basically kind of only would have gotten worse, as we've seen in Japan. Um, but reinforced memory boost, I think, is kind of a sleeper as far as like how it'll affect our meta, because while in BT6 it was pretty much exclusively security control that was using it, um, it it had been adapted in the Japanese meta to be just like I guess a general consistency recovery tool by yellow hybrids and yellow based control decks in general. Um, that line between the yellow hybrid and the yellow control deck is a little blurry sometimes. Um, I guess yeah. Why don't we start with that then? Um, what is your initial like uh, interpretation or definition of like yellow hybrid?
So the yellow hybrids all share this very same package where you're literally just playing the hybrids. You're focused on Zoe, you're focused on Kazemon, Sylphimon, and Jet Sylphimon. The ancient you could just forget about because the ancient is just not good. What they generally do is they just use Zoe to try to dig out their hybrid, and then they just digivolve into said hybrid for two, potentially zero with Bokomon, and then Digivolve for one into Jet Sylphimon for literally the easiest and most free recovery that we've seen in a very long time. Outside of that package, they generally just run a butt ton of tamers and kind of just do whatever they want to stall until they could basically chip you out, essentially, just because of like the stall tactics that yellow recovery generally does. And then what they generally do, I know I'm saying generally a lot, but like what they then do to try to help close out the game is, well, they're already playing with hybrids and tamers so much, so they also just have Susanamon just because he's Susanamon. Just be like, oh, a lot of my Digimon died just because I Digivolved, swung, now they're all in the trash. Cool, let's put them back in the deck for Susanamon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just the ability of any deck to recycle its spent resources as additional resources is a huge engine and a big threat to have, because at any point as you think you're winning, you're chipping it away, and like as they're digivolving off their tamers, you're removing them, or you're just deleting their Digimon in some way, and then just for like the next turn like a couple turns later, they have their met their requirements for Susanamon, and they just take any tamer and just turn it into a level 7 that deletes something, and then if it happens to survive for the next turn, swings for 3 checks inherently.
Yeah, and with the Mega Digimon Fusion ban, that strategy isn't as good because you don't have Analog Youth in the deck anymore to literally just use to Digivolve into Susanamon. I mean, I don't think the Yellow Hybrid deck actually used it to begin with, because it was probably just easier for them to use any of their yellow tamers just because they run a ginormous abundance of. And I actually think the big change compared to us versus Japan is I think Shine Greymon is going to be one of the best de facto ways to utilize the hybrid deck. Whereas in Japan, they kind of either left it alone just as hybrids and stopped there and ran only Susanamon as their mega, just because, again, Mega Digimon Fusion. But now that we don't have that, it kind of forces us to change things a little bit. And I think Shine Greymon is just the best use of how we could use tamers, just because he's already wanting to play with tamers. He has easy ways of playing the tamers for free, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I know we mentioned it in prior episodes, but if anyone hadn't listened to that, then it's our, I guess, opinion slash interpretation that um, MDF was banned specifically for Susanamon. I think it was maybe in the wording of the actual banning itself too, but like it wasn't banned for Lilith Loop. It was banned for Susanamon because going from costing 7 to costing, I still believe cost 1, reduced by
Yeah,
6.
it would cost like one or
It would
two.
still cost 1. Then uh, it would still be like just a huge tempo swing. Yeah, and at the point now where without MDF, I don't believe they would even run the analog youth. It's just not worthwhile to run at all. They don't need they don't need white tamers because their hybrids can't evo off the white tamers anyway.
Yeah, I think they actually just was hoping Pokemon would live and then use Mega Digimon Fusion there to actually make Susanomon free, just because you're digivolving off of a tamer to trigger Pokemon. So I think that's generally what they were doing before. And like we could still attempt to try to do something very similar with win rate 60%. So that card might actually see an increase in play. Just because like you draw a lot in Digimon and you already accrue lots of hand advantage. So it's just like at a certain point, when is too much cards in your hand? Like yes, you have a whole bunch of different options, but now that you have a whole bunch of different options to like think about your turns with, you can actually start using your hand more efficiently as a resource. So I think that 60% win rate is going to be a really good card, especially since you also don't need Pokemon on the field. You just need a tamer. So it kind of helps make it cheaper on top of your yellow tamers, giving you lots of memory to be able to play Susanamon. So I think it's still going to be a very strong strategy. I just think they can't rely solely on that as their only win condition anymore.
Yeah. Um, losing MDF definitely changes their strategy, and they have to lean more on, I guess, what the deck was intended to do, more so than like just stall until they can get Susanamon out, basically. Because an MDF Susanamon could then Evo and swing in the same turn, um, giving you that security +2 immediately. And yeah, that's just a combination that of like decks weren't really like designed to deal with. That's not the intention of the card. Like um, it costing 7 was supposed to be the way that you can just inherently say, um, okay, like you Evo and pass turn. Can your opponent respond to it? And if not, then you win the game basically. But yeah, MDF and win rate 60% do cheat out that system a little bit.
Yeah, but like they're doing it like 60% win rate is a little bit more fair, but at the same time, it's also not because it's actually easier to play than what people think. Yes, you do have to digivolve, you do have to discard a Digimon of the same color as the one you're digivolving, not digivolving into. A lot of people mistake that wording on the card. It is a little bit awkward, but it's just a super easy card to use for basically like literally any deck playing a tamer. And most decks at this point, especially in hybrid meta specifically, they're going to be running a tamer. So it's going to be a super easy card to use for virtually any hybrid based deck.
Yeah. Um, so I guess going a little bit deeper into it, um, the yellow hybrid deck, um, will be weaker since it's now missing, two technical core pieces, reinforced memory boost, and MDF. I guess we've gone over like why MDF was critical, and this will just be a blanket for any deck that wanted to run Susanamon. They could cheat in MDF because they already kind of ran the Bokomons, or they could slide in Analog Youth. But um,
which actually help feed it unironically.
yeah, so it was yeah, there was basically no downside there because you would just throw hybrids in your trash anyway. Um,
Yep.
and but Memory Boost was uniquely used by the Yellow decks, and it kind of supported this defensive, passive, like building, controlling style that isn't necessarily ubiquitous with Yellow. Like I want to say that like the Yellow decks of the past haven't necessarily tried to win in the same ways that Yellow Hybrids likes to win, and it's why the line between yellow hybrids and like yellow security control is somewhat blurry. At least definitely more so than in the past.
Right, because the end goal of both decks is very similar, where it's just like you're just literally trying to recover, stall, and chip with whatever tools you have until you eventually just win the game.
Yeah. Um and just the yellow hybrid base being so efficient and so like grindy, I guess, is because you play out your tamers and it's something that your opponent can't necessarily respond to, they can't necessarily interact with, and then you can efficiently use those tamers in ways to recover, gain advantages, and chip. Especially with a Bokomon out, you could, Evo off of one of your throwaway tamers that have already given you their benefit at the start of the turn, or their benefit when they hit the field in the form of the tamer with the inheritable. Um,
Or even just TK, like your extra TKs. It's like, oh,
yeah,
I have two TKs, just use one. The
yeah.
second one's not doing anything, literally.
So you have like options, you have resources, and you can evo off of so that like the first one, the four level 4 2 cost one would be free with Pokemon or still costs 2. Then you can then pay one more to Jet Sylphie, recover one, and honestly if you really wanted to just swing right there and just chip, and if it dies, you like your opponent can't really interact with the rest of your board because it's just a bunch of Tainers remaining.
Right.
Um so that I guess it lines up more so with like what other card games would consider control decks to be, where they build resources, they do like establish control, um, and they do lean more on those options like the heavy security cards and recovery of traditionally security control decks of past.
Right. And then the power, like, of using whatever level 6 that you want to use. Like, I'm only saying Shine is so good because you're already just playing Tamers. But, like, even if you just get low enough and just go, like, Jet Sylvie for essentially one into Kazuchi, just heal and now have a big beater, like, that's still kind of just, like, really scary because at the end of the day, it is still, like, a control chip style, like, grind deck. And that's, like, a good card to use in complements to it to try to help actually close out the game because they actually need a way to close out the game.
So it's I guess here it's a good point to note that um, basically every deck this format is kind of defined by its ability to either respond or deal with or overcome like the tamer slash hybrid problem. Um, a lot of decks will be running hybrids. They will be running tamer based strategies, and since tamers are still outside a very couple choice cards, um, like the taboo card type. You cannot interact with them basically outside of those choice couple few. Um, so in like the rookie rush of formats past, you drop a 3 cost rookie or you drop two cost rookies, and you're building a board state, you're building a threat. Now you're just slamming a TK. You're gaining advantage. You're filtering through your security. And then you start at 3 the next turn, and um, your opponent can't deal with that in the same way, and the ability to just evo off of those tamers and use those tamers as a resource after they've already provided their benefit is just something that a lot of decks can't deal with.
And we even saw this in past formats too, where like we joke around with like Bushi for game because like that's just a very uninteractable card where it's just like you just have enough memory, hard slam Bushi swing. People were joking around the same things with Agunimon for game and Lobo for game, just because they followed that very same like style approach. You just already had your tamer on the field, you broke all of their security, and then you just digivolve on top of the tamer, and well, the game is kind of just over.
Yeah. Um, I can't say for every deck, but like in general, I guess hybrids now that every color has access to them will pretty much fill that like almost blocker-esque role where um whenever your archetype allows for it or doesn't automatically support it directly, you just run like a solid 2 to 3 level 4 2 cost hybrids just so that every deck now technically has the Aguni for game, Lobo for game swing.
Right. And yellow hybrids, I think, is in a more special position just because they have a slightly higher quality of tamers than some of the other tamers that other colors have. So it's a lot easier for them to actually want to use their tamers just because they have a multitude of different ways to gain a lot of additional value off of those cards. Not only just for memory gain, but for various other tech and utility.
So I know you haven't put out your tier list yet. I guess it's the easiest place to pick your brain about this, but um, so given the changes that we're seeing, um, where do you think yellow hybrids falls in the meta? I guess whether you want to call it the yellow hybrids deck or the yellow hybrid control, like maybe define them as two different decks, but like where do you think they fall? I guess in the tier list in your mind.
I think yellow hybrids, just in a general sense, is still going to be tier one, just because they're going to replace the Mega Digimon Fusion with win rate 60%, and then they're just going to adapt to whatever changes the English meta is going to provide, just because the English meta and JP meta are different metas. Like, we've already seen this, this is established known fact. So it's like, I think the consistency that yellow already has leans to its benefit, and it's going to be up to the individuals to figure out how to actually optimize and maximize that. And I think based on the tools that they already have for yellow, it's going to be a very powerful deck in various different ways.
Something to I guess go over is that um, there's the data that you don't see is sometimes um, more obvious than the data that you do see. And now that we are truly on our own with a BT7 meta, like I mean we've technically been on our own a little bit with like access to various promos and timings of promos, but now that we are entering a meta with just less cards of meta impact than Japan had, decks that never saw the light of day due to like being just hard ice walled out of the games, um, now can flourish, so to speak, in a meta that doesn't control the turns as much. Because I really just do think that um, yellow hybrids, while it is hurt by the missing of MDF and it misses reinforced memory boost, it still does gain from the fact that it won't be ice walled as much. Obviously, still technically a one of, but it's not something you have to like plan each turn around anymore.
Right. It's like when we saw Hidden Potential Discovered get hit, that kind of changed how RBT4 meta went, and this is kind of that same style of effect where it's just like, okay, now there is that lack of tool, so now we have to actually fundamentally think about things a little bit differently, just because, well, it's actually going to be different.
Yeah, decks that went wider were more adversely punished by um, Ice Wall, and therefore decks that go wider should perform better in this meta than were allowed to perform in Japan. And they hit that threshold where they couldn't match the pace that the blue decks with Ice Wall set, and were just kind of like priced out of the meta entirely, and people just completely defaulted onto the decks that could deal with it.
Right, because like blue also has the ability to multi-attack, so they use that to their benefit where it's just like they get a couple of swings in the early to mid stages of the game, and then they literally just line up an ice ball to stop the opponent from even thinking about trying to do anything, and then they proceed to kill them the following turn if they could. Just because they would then do whatever combo play or power play that they had because they set it up with ice ball.
Yeah. So I just think that at a base level, we're going to see a lot more experimentation and a lot more, um, I guess, trial and error as far as like which decks that did not see play in Japan. Was it because they were actually unfit for the meta? Was it actually because they couldn't deal with these top tier threats, or really was it were they just priced out with Ice Wall?
Right, and I think that's going to be really exciting and interesting to see like how things are going to develop.
So since we've already mentioned it, Ice Wall, um, let's move on to Blue. Blue Hybrids is a deck, um, and with Magna Garurumon as its premier mega, um, where do you see Blue landing after the aftermath of missing Ice Wall, I guess?
So blue is in a really interesting position just because they have, compared to some of the other colors, a lot higher amounts of usability on just what hybrids can do. So they have Strabimon as a level 3 hybrid in various different forms. A lot of the other colors don't have that outside of red with Flamemon, but I digress. And like they have another set of, they actually have two extra sets of hybrids that a lot of the other colors don't have. So they have the BT04 hybrids, then they have the BT07 hybrids, and then they even have the Tommy hybrids to play with. So there's just a whole bunch of extra like cards for them to use in various different ways that all just work just because it all fits under the hybrid banner. So like I think blue hybrids is definitely going to see probably the most experimentation just because there's a lot to play with. I think like the ancient variant using ancient Garurumon is a pretty solid variant. I think literally just Magna Garurumon, the deck, is going to be pretty interesting. Then you even have like a little bit more of an aggressive slash control style in the form of just using Tommy's hybrids and not even worrying about the Lobos and Kendo Garurumons, just because Tommy's is already doing something that Blue wants to do, which is attack the inheritable source. You have Sojo to continue said trend. Then you have Tommy, which also can do it. And then you have Korikakumon to benefit you for doing that by stun locking the opponent's Digimon. So I think without the inclusion of Ice Wall, they're just going to lean a little bit more towards that as their defensive backbone. But again, there's just a lot of different things that blue hybrids can do just because, well, there's a lot of different tools for it to play with.
Yeah, like I guess that just something to note here, like um blue and red having that additional wave of hybrids, that this isn't their first iteration of hybrids, does give them a little bit more leverage. Um, I know just having access to those ancient packages as sub packages, or I guess in some cases like their premier package, um, really gives the deck more versatility than the other hybrids have.
Right, because like even just going back to yellow hybrids, it's just a very, I don't want to say one note deck, but like it can't do a whole lot to aggress. It's just like once you know what aggressive tool they have, you kind of know what to expect. But with blue hybrids, you kind of just don't know what to expect because you don't know which variant they're going to be playing.
Yeah, and like yellow's problem is almost that like none of the megas are necessarily even like good enough to be the Decido best mega of the deck, right? It doesn't even really have a face, so to speak. If anything, it's Jet Sylphimon being probably the best card in the deck necessarily, and the card that you definitely run four of. But um, it's something that blue doesn't struggle. Blue, I guess, and then by proxy, red doesn't really struggle with as much. They have defined cards that they want to get into and use the hybrids to support.
Right.
So, um, anything else with blue that you want to mention? Just looking at it.
Blue, thinking about it now, like, and again, like I hate to like look at Japanese data at this point just because again, it's skewed and a little bit inaccurate just because our format is going to be different with those restrictions. I do think the development that Japan used leaned more towards the Tommy Tamers. So I think we're going to start off our meta with a lot of people trying to go for that Tommy route just because the stunlock potential on the opponent's Digimon is very, very powerful and very, very easy. And like, you don't even need to worry about doing that because it's just built into the deck. So I think a lot of people are going to lean more towards Tommy, and just end the game with Magna Gurumon with a couple of swings. And they're going to focus a little bit less on the Ancient, just because Ancient Gurumon, while it's a good card, it does take a little bit of setup to make it like super, super good. But outside of, well, I mean, you could do some really cute and cheesy things if you're able to draw enough, but that just is a fault of not Takuya, Koji for being a little bit more fair than Takuya. Um, but it just leaves a lot of experimentation with the deck because just the fundamental defense change without Ice Wall is going to force blue decks to rethink how they're going to do defense while aggressing at the same time.
Just so, since we're talking about it, if anyone doesn't understand, Tommy Himi is the BT07 blue tamer, one of the two hybrid tamers added for blue. And he is itself like his own engine, so to speak, because he's a tamer that on play trashes three Digivolution sources from the bottom of one of your opponent's Digimon, and has the inheritable of when attacking once per turn until the end of your opponent's turn, one of your opponent's Digimon with no sources cannot attack or block. So three sources is handles a lot of Digimon, and at least handles most blockers. So he is itself like an engine just to strip and then stun in one card.
Right, and blue also has a very high level of usage on some of their hybrids, just because their hybrids have lots of good value. So Davis will help you draw cards and filter through your deck. You have Sora and Joe that's already interacting with your opponent not having Digimon with sources to gain you extra memory while also destroying the opponent's inheritable sources at the same time. So like there's just a lot of moving parts and pieces that lead it to be a very strong package and making Tommy probably one of the better tamers to come out of the set.
Yeah, while I feel a little bad for the like Hexablaumon, Azulongmon engine, um, because they never really saw a whole lot of like success in the meta, um, their pieces have been adapted and used like as a generic like blue control-y element by these blue hybrid decks.
Right, and they could do it a little bit cheaper and faster than what Hexablaumon can do, even though for the most part it is pseudo temporary because you have to re-keep using Tommy's ability. But that's not that big of a deal because you also have Korikakumon to help subsidize that to actually have another instance of that type of ability. Then you also have Howling Memory Boost as another instance of that ability. And even the Hexablaumon decks, they started actually adopting this Tommy sub package just because it naturally fits with what the deck is trying to do.
Yeah, you could just you can basically just throw it in anything. It's a self-containing package. You don't need to run um, the fact that the Tommy itself strips the sources, and then as long as you digivolve a hybrid over it, you can then stun lock anything that doesn't have sources. Um, I do know that the like Tommy specific hybrid um, also trashes some sources. Trashes one Digivolution source when
Yeah,
digivolving.
Kumamon. Yeah, Kumamon just basically is a Lobomon with 1000 DP less to just trash the opponent's inheritables. And the cool thing is, you don't actually have to have a tamer to actually use this ability. You could just be like, okay, level 3 Kumamon, trash a source, trigger some abilities. Like it's another very flexible and versatile card on how you could use it.
Yeah, I think it's something that we're just seeing is that like in general, decks that are running cards that have more efficient, more tempo-oriented effects, and we're kind of moving away from like the I guess the earlier ideas of like running your just generic one cost level 4 Evo was like a dedicated 4 of in your deck every time just because it allowed you to tempo into your mega faster.
Yeah, and then there's other cards that like help you tempo. So like going back to the Hexablau package as an example, Hexablau splashed with Tommy, with Kumamon, you could technically Evo Kumamon for one on top of a Blukomon. So you could be like, cool, egg, whatever egg it is, Blukomon, Kumamon, trash a source, and then gain the memory. So now that card basically effectively evoed for one.
As long as you do it outside of raising. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
You can just raise the level 3 and then Evo.
Yeah, but
Tempo it
part of
out.
what I've noticed as a trend for this meta is like the ways that we use cards are more than just what's printed on the card. So it's just like we have more ways to actually use cards, and those are the types of cards people are prioritizing over others just because, well, they can handle multiple different situations depending on what we need the card to do and when and see and how we do it.
Yeah. Um, so we've already touched on it a little bit. Um, I guess um, the opposite end of the coin from BT6, BT7 gives red and blue a very similar package, very similarly minded package, I guess. So just like you've got your Magna Garurumon in blue, you get Emperor Greymon in red, and the red package is just slightly more competitively viable, like enough to the point where you're definitely gonna see more red hybrids probably than blue hybrids. I guess I can't say that definitively, but without Ice Wall, probably.
I would say that assessment is probably correct. Like, people have been craving for a good red deck for a while that works, and like, the problem with Jesmon is the fact that the deck isn't consistent enough to like really function the way it needs to function. And because Hybrids plays the game a little bit differently, it has a lot more consistency to it just because of, well, how Hybrids are playing. They have so many diggers, they have so many like tamers to play with and different ways to play their cards. And even though Digitama doesn't have any draw, like the deck still can move through itself relatively efficiently.
Yeah. Um, I guess it's a good place here. Um, the red package also kind of uses a weird ruling that is just something that you're going to have to be aware of as, I guess, BT7 moving forward. It's not completely new as far as like its premise, but um, it's the idea of costs and hidden information. So um, the way that the red tamer works, Takuya, uh, main once per turn, you may place 5 cards with hybrid in their traits from your trash under this tamer in any order to digivolve into Emperor Greymon. The problem with the wording is that it allows you to do that and technically not have Emperor Greymon, or choose not to evolve into Emperor Greymon. You can tuck sources for no memory and do nothing once per turn.
Right. Koji could also do this, but the fact that Takuya is from the grave makes it a lot easier of a card to use because Koji is from the hand. Like, that's 5 cards you're losing from your hand to use Koji. And like the whole point is you're using Beowulfmon for blue to add cards back to your hand to actually be able to do that. Where Takuya, you just need to swing and have your hybrids die, and then he's just automatically online. Or even just tech in cards like Analog Youth to like try to help self mill a little bit while having good consistency to fill up your trash to be able to use Takuya. And then you could use Takuya because of this more efficiently and with other cards to do some really disgustingly stupid things.
Yeah, the the big one being, as we've already mentioned, that these decks do adapt the ancient package. You can tuck ancient hybrids and then digivolve into an ancient over Takuya, activating its inheritable and then using the inheritables of everything that you just tucked. So it basically allows you to run an ancient hybrid red deck that just includes Takuya, and you can tuck the ancient promos underneath to make the ancient Greymon cheaper.
Yeah, so more specifically, it's the Agunimon promo. That is a hybrid, so Takuya can put it underneath. And then the idea is you just digivolve literally all the way up into your level 5 to then use the promos to reduce the evolution of the ancient. So it's just something very, very powerful, and literally in that type of scenario with that ancient Greymon, with a huge stack underneath him because of Takuya, he could basically one-shot the opponent's security. And with the new Alderman, it basically gives the Ancient Greymon a delicate plan type of effect. So that way he can even ignore the fact that the opponent has options in security.
Yeah, it's something that obviously Jesmon has struggled with, was that its consistency. It needed to see Savior. It needed to see, a specific level 4 usually the, started at Greymon, and it didn't have ways to search for all these different things, and it needed the delicate plan if it was going up against like a security dangerous deck. Um, it just doesn't need those things. This Emperor Greymon red hybrid deck doesn't need those things. It just needs to see hybrids and to see tamers, all of which are just good, efficient cards that the deck wants to be running anyway.
Right. And like the fact that we also have like some better cards to interact with our hybrids just make the deck even stronger so we can have more different ways on how we could approach what we're doing with our opponent. So you might not even need to use Takuya to set up that type of like play to shove the promo Agoonies underneath him. You could just use the promo Agoonies as a good way to try to fill up your trash for Takuya just because you could digivolve it on top of a Flamemon to give Emperor Greymon like piercing or an on delete ability, then literally just swing, warp, and try to deal lots of damage that way with very little downside to you.
I
And we even have Atomic Inferno to just expedite how much damage and how fast we can do said damage. Just because a lot of the cards we're playing are hybrids, and it's just boosting our hybrids by an insane degree while allowing us to deal lots of potential damage because of its not only its first ability to increase the security attack of a Digimon, but the security ability to increase the security of all of your Digimon. So you could have like a very powerful push turn if that card comes out in security and you have a proper setup.
Yeah, this, like you said earlier, this is really just the deck that Red has wanted, probably since the inception of the game, because it has a dangerous security in the form of, like, it can still run those like red kill cards. It can still run tamers that you don't want to just give them in value. And if you do happen to flip, I believe that's a BT4 card, right?
Um, which one?
The plus security 3000 DP.
Oh, Atomic Inferno? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a BT4 card.
yeah, it's from the BT4 package. Um, so if you happen to flip that in security, you've almost certainly given your opponent lethal in the next turn as long as they have, two Digimon. So,
Right, because like even just out of raising, have the security tech plus, and then digivolve on top of a hybrid, or digivolve a tamer on top of a hybrid. Like that's already four potential security checks, which
yeah.
is kind of crazy.
So, I know I mentioned it at the beginning, but um, I'm bidding at this section, I guess. But the other card that uses the same like pseudo ruling is Susanamon himself. So you may digivolve this card onto one of your tamers as if the tamer is a level 6 Digimon by placing 10 tamer cards and or hybrids in their traits from your hand and or trash to the bottom of your deck. And it also says may, so what you can do is if you're ever just almost about to deck out, you can just, you know, shove those cards back into your at the bottom of your deck essentially and not deck out, you know, but not digivolve into Susanomon.
Well, you would have to digivolve into Susanamon because that's the cost to actually get the card on the field. The way Takuya and by extension Koji works is you might not have the card in your hand to do that, but you have to do that for Susanamon because it is a cost. Like it's really weird because like the effects are very similar. It's just one is a literal card on the field already. So you have that hidden information to not take the action, like the secondary action. But with a card like Susamon, you actually do have to digivolve
See, I guess
because that is the cost to use that effect.
that just goes to speak how particular these wordings are, because I wasn't even aware of that. But so
Yeah, I
like
can't just hide Susanamon and say I'm tucking 10 underneath because I'm hiding a Susanamon. Like, you have to actually digivolve into Susanamon. But that just goes to Susanamon's overall playability to handle decks like Security Control, where it's just like it really just wants to grind you down. And now with Susanamon not only being a big security beater himself, but now you can't deck out, it's like a win-win.
yeah, it's also why whatever security decks that kind of remain in this format will probably need to adapt the hybrid package and by extension Susanamon so that they don't deck themselves out by recovering and by sustaining and grinding out other control decks. So basically the control deck that doesn't have Susanamon will lose.
Well, I mean, it's one of those adapt or die type of situations. So I do think there is security control in some capacity without the hybrid package, just because you still need those kill cards, and those kill cards are now being taken up by tamers, so that way you could actually use Susanamon and use your hybrids. But I digress. And like as far as where I would place red and blue in the overall grand scheme of the meta, I think both of them are still tier 1 decks just because they're very, very powerful decks and very highly aggressive decks. Like the decks that are generally doing well are the decks that can move through itself relatively easily while having a very easy and high damage output. And
Yeah,
both of these decks kind of fit that mold.
yeah. Um, I know we haven't talked a lot about the bond decks yet, and I kind of want to save them for a little later, but I guess just so no one has to ask now. The bond decks do see quite a hit, not necessarily like Gabuban missing Ice Wall is actually very devastating to specifically Gabuban's plan because Ice Wall allowed them to stall for turns that they basically had no right not losing on the following turn. Um, and then the bonds themselves are just so much more of a detriment in a meta where um, the security is more tamer focused. So like the ability to just chip away a couple quick isn't necessarily um, as impactful, especially against yellow hybrid specifically, who runs like security-based recovery cards, so they can recoup all the losses from a bond turn, and then obviously the bond once burning their security doesn't recover anything. Um, and just the uninteractivity, as I mentioned before, about Gabuban, where like they cannot remove tamers, means that they just have a significantly worse matchup into any like hybrid based deck as opposed to in previous formats where you had to basically stay in raising to avoid that.
Right. And that's just any control based deck where it's just like against hybrids, control just really doesn't do anything because they kind of can't. It's like, oh, I really want to use this kill card, but all they have are tamers on the field. How do I kill them? And like going back into like why security control kind of does take a little bit of a hit and why it has to force and why it's forced to adapt is because it just can't, it literally cannot do what it needs to do because there's just a lack of Digimon on the field, and it's more tamers on the field. So I do think like security control is probably going to try to adapt Lucimon in some way, shape, or form, just because that's one of the only ways that they have to try to delete the tamers. On top of the fact that they might even try to use a card like um, All Delete to try to just wipe the field of the opponent's tamers.
Yeah, I know we did see a little bit of like I guess one deck, but still at the top tables for nationals from uh just a couple of weeks ago. Um,
Yeah, I
but
mean, there is something to it. It is a little bit more specific of a tech, but I do think like a security control deck that's already playing Omnimon Sport Defeat, like there's no reason not to just run one of that card for
mm,
when that situation does come up.
yeah, in a deck that is already that grindy and that stally. that usually they have a plethora of things that they can play on their turn. So giving them that ability to wipe the board of tamers would be fairly detrimental.
Right. Even at the cost of your own, it's just like you don't care because you're harming them more than you're harming yourself.
Since you mentioned Lucamon, we could probably just move on to purple. Purple is the first color that I guess we're going to talk about that isn't exclusively running hybrids as its de facto archetype. It still will probably be purple Lilith Cerberus. Um, like adapting to the new Cerberus loop, um, as it's called, using the Cerberus engine with Eismon. Um, but MDF is gone. They will just use win rate 60% instead. It honestly, it probably isn't too impactful, especially as I know there are a lot of people who didn't expect Lilith Loop to do as well as it did at Nationals, and now I feel like a lot more people are going to pick it up and use it with the Eismon engine while they still have it.
Right. On top of the fact that like now they're not solely shoehorned into Analog Youth and Moena as the de facto white tamers, like they're still probably going to use Analog Youth because that card's like stupidly good. But like now they're not shoehorned into using Moena, and they could go back to using the BT02 mat to just actually have a solid tamer to use. And then like there's just not really a downside to running the deck as like the de facto purple deck because it has the tools to adapt itself to change based on the ban and restricted announcement.
Yeah. Um, the deck also just has those combo turns that um, kind of take advantage of the hybrid meta in a way because they've never been controlling in the way that they remove your opponent's board or they absolutely like stall you. They just get to a point where they get their loop, they get their combo, and they get their wide board state, and then ask the opponent to respond to it. I have passed, I
Right.
have all these threats now. It doesn't end on that turn necessarily. I mean, Nailbone does exist, but um, at least most of the decks I don't even think run Nailbone. Like,
No,
you just go wide.
only Bellastar. Yeah, only Bellastar runs Nailbone just because it's a 7 costed option. Like, I still think Purple Three Musketeers is a viable deck, and I think because of the Eismon package, it does get better. Like, the Eismon package is just so disgustingly good for basically any purple deck. Like, that's why Eismon is getting a limitation in the next set, on top of a unhealthy interaction with another card. But leaving that aside, like the Eismon package is just so good for virtually any purple deck. It just helps push that whatever you're using it in forward, just because it's a consistency tool while building a board state at the same time.
Yeah. I would even say that since Purple's number one deck is not the hybrid deck, I wouldn't even say it's its number two with the Purple toolbox, just generically Purple good stuff, I guess, package, because Purple just has gotten these niche tools over time that it's been able to piece together, and it really does come together in BT7. BT7, I guess, has um, is something that other sets don't necessarily do in my mind, where it has a very clear design philosophy, it has a very clear goal. It doesn't feel as scattered, and it does really shore up some of these weaknesses and like missing pieces that these decks have been asking for in a long time.
Right, and like purple was already a very high synergy color to begin with, where purple's end goal is just, hey, I have a large trash, cool, let me use it for various different things. And like it doesn't necessarily matter how things are getting in there as long as things are getting in there. I personally think the easiest way is just looting, drawing, and discarding. Just because, well, you're fixing and rigging your trash with what you're discarding, so you're physically purposefully putting cards you want in there while digging through your deck and seeing the cards that you need and want. So that's kind of where the Icemon package like becomes super good, and why Titamon because becomes super good because like he's already playing with that, and the fact that the Nidhogg line for purple is also playing with that type of synergy. So like it just is a deck that has lots of moving parts and pieces that just all work together.
Yeah. And purple players in general have been fairly dedicated, especially those who've been playing it like from the start, because it is a color that rewards playing basically purple and only purple and really learning the ins and outs of its combinations and its interactions because you usually do have choices that you aren't necessarily faced with in other decks. You know, like when the blue players biggest decision they have to make is which level 4 do they use, or do I use an option card, or do I attack? That's something every deck deals with. Purple has to deal with, like, okay, do I want to, do I want to loot now? Do I want to try and kill this Digimon and then filter my hand potentially? Like, what do I have in my trash that completely changes the scope of my, like, capabilities for that given turn? How
To
close am I to
mention
Zwart?
Yeah, not to mention like what cards am I going to be discarding? What is the likelihood of cards I'm going to see? Like there's just a lot of decision making that purple has to do compared to a lot of other colors.
Yeah, the skill ceiling of purple, I'd say, is probably the highest of any deck still by far. And even like the purple toolbox Titamon deck uh, also does take advantage of that because it has all like the recursive nature of like sacking things and trashing things and gaining extra swing, gaining advantages from these potential like losses that purple doesn't even really see as losses.
No, and that's like the interesting thing to Digimon, where it's just like, yeah, other card games have done that before, but the way Digimon does it, it's like actually astonishing on how they're turning these normally bad things into a positive that's actually feeling like a positive. Like, I've come from Magic before, self-milling yourself and grave recursion, that's absolutely nothing new. Getting yourself to zero cards in your security, or not your security, in your deck and then just having a card that auto wins you game. Again, that's like nothing really new, but like the way purple does it makes it feel a little bit more special. It makes it feel like you actually earned it. And I think that's why like purple players really love purple because it's a very feels good color to play that rewards you for smart play
Yeah,
on top of smart deck building.
it is one of the colors where like you can really distinguish like I guess it's the color that the better player wins higher percentage of the time as opposed to something that's prone to bricking like Jessmon or um like aggressive decks such as like Gabuband or Aguband. Those
Right.
decks.
And then Yeah, and then BT07 also like the purple hits keep coming because they still also have their hybrid deck, which is actually a pretty funny deck because like you could adopt so many different things inside of it and do so much with it because again, purple is a very high synergy color and everything just works. I think the more common way to play it is going to be using Cherubimon that comes within the set. And you could even splash in the Lucimon package. You could even do some very stupid combos with Nemon and Jaeger Loimon and all that stuff. Like there's just a lot of like really weird and powerful things that even purple hybrids can do, even for not being the premier purple deck.
Yeah. Um so kind of I guess opening a new topic a little bit. Um one of the things that the tamer decks do, the hybrid decks, is it allows you, since the tamers are your base, your rookies essentially. They're like you don't need to run real rookies, which means you don't need to run real eggs. I guess on-colored eggs specifically. You can obviously use a lot of these decks still run rookies and they still run, but you're not required to. So on a lot of Japanese lists, especially later, um, I don't know if they were necessarily influenced by the announcement of the following set that introduced, dual colored cards, but um, they definitely broke out of the mold of yellow decks, yellow eggs. I know Security Control has kind of always done that, and different decks have adapted using eggs as like open up options or opening up colors for option cards. But this is the first time we've ever seen decks completely forego that. I guess they're just using it the same way Security Control is. It's not that innovative. I'm kind of dialing back a
Right,
little bit.
because like most of these hybrid decks actually all of the hybrid decks. If you're not playing for Pokemon, you're already doing it wrong. Like that's the only thing I can actually de facto say. Like if you are playing a hybrid deck and you're not running for Pokemon, you are doing it wrong. I hate saying that, but like it is just true because that card is just so good.
It's so
He's a
efficient.
white Digimon, so you don't need a specific color egg. He's helping dig out any color hybrid, any color tamer, and any color ancient. So like he's just doing everything that you want to do, especially if you're trying to splash and support a different color.
Yeah, and it's something that, Digimon's obviously done quite a bit of it. It's the searcher. Like the decks that have the searchers are the more consistent ones, as provided like the limitations of the searcher. Obviously, Jessmon's searcher isn't perfect, but Pokemon's a very like generous searcher. Reveal 5 cards, it's quite a bit, and add 1 hybrid and 1 tamer.
Well, one hybrid or ancient, and then one
Yeah,
tamer.
1 hybrid or ancient and tamer. So it could potentially be a +2 when you're looking at 5 cards. So you just really do have, obviously, like the best case Jessmon scenario is you pull a Savior and a Jessmon or a Sister and a Jessmon, whichever of those three you're missing that you saw. But
Yeah, it's basically 1 to 2 Hucks or 1 to 2 Sisters.
so, but and just having the added benefit of it, it still only costs 3. It's not super expensive, and it has that static benefit. You can just sit there and basically force your opponent to remove it in some way. If you're playing against yellow, they'll probably have a way to just DP minus it out anyway. But if they're not, they have to commit resources to remove it usually.
Yeah, and Pokemon is also a very dangerous card just because his passive ability while he's actually on the field lets you gain 2 memory for digivolving on top of a tamer. So like most of the level 4s digivolve for 2 on top of a tamer, so it's essentially a free evolution. And then a lot of the level 5 hybrids that came from the set evolve for 1 if you have a tamer underneath the digivolution source of the Digimon you're digivolving. So it's like, oh, Pokemon, here's my tamer, digivolve for 0 essentially into a level 4, digivolve for 1 into a level 5, and then pay whatever else you want for your level 6, and then boom, a very easy, very fast level 6 stack out of nowhere. And that's kind of like why control decks are having such a hard time, because they have 0 to deal with that. Like the tamer's just going to sit there, and then you literally have to remove Pokemon, or he's going to actually help you make very, very powerful plays very fast.
Yeah, like I know, um, like the easiest example that I've seen is it's mostly yellow because yellow runs this like pseudo control deck anyway sometimes, and um they're so not as opposed to running alternate colored eggs. So I've seen, um if you're running that like more security control oriented, I've seen yellow hybrid decks run black eggs with Chikurimons, just 4 of, so that gives them extra D-Digivolves off their security. I've seen yellow decks run purple eggs, so they can run Demi-Meramon, and then run Gazimon, so they have access to memory blocking. Like, there's a
Top
lot
of
of ways to
Schwartz
just really
Lizard.
abuse.
Yeah, on top of the fact that like purple also has Schwartz Lizard, so like it's a very
Yeah,
easy card to use with purple egg, where it's just like, oh, I'm already playing a whole bunch of tamers just because, hybrids. So let's just start removing your Digimon if you're going wide. So I think Schwartz Lizard's going to be a very powerful splash card for a lot of hybrid decks. Even like red splashes using Atomic Inferno off color could be very, very powerful, especially in something like green hybrids, where like they have very fast and easy ways to get up into their mega, probably the fastest and easiest compared to all of the other colors. But that's by design because that's just what green does. And you throw in like red eggs and run Atomic Inferno, like that's gonna be very, very devastating. Seeing a ancient Beetlemon swing like with 2 security checks, piercing, and will burn a security, like that just sounds absolutely like devastating.
yeah. Um, the off-colored eggs and the option cards that it really opens up, um, it really like I guess is like kind of a toe in the water if to like the two-color decks of like BT8, but as far as BT7's concerned, um, I think the only like true like I even say that like a lot of these decks just dip their toes in because even like the Machine Dramon deck has the ability to run, since it's never really cared about its eggs either. Machine Dramon can just opt to run blue eggs and run jamming Vmon and Kaisernail.
Yeah, because the Machine Dramon deck, the way it wants to work is just literally let me just replay my Machine Dramons. And we have Chaos Dramon to help digivolve our like in quotation marks dead our dead
Machine
Machine
Dramon.
Dramons where it doesn't have a whole bunch of inheritables. And then you just Kaiser nail it out and basically gain some additional memory on top of the fact that you just now got a free uh level 6 that now has another full stack underneath. Like that's what's making that synergy super strong. And like you said, uh, it could run it because it just doesn't care about its eggs. Like, yeah, you could say black eggs are still really good, and you could like play this tempo game up to your level fives and be aggressive with your level fives, or you could just try to draw a lot and just hard slam Machine Dramon and call it a day.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of covered all of the hide decks. I know we only touched on green a little bit, but we're running out of time, so we might have to just
Yeah,
save that
I
for next
think
week.
green, yeah, just to cover green a little bit more, I think green hybrids is probably the most playable green deck that they have. Um, just because control gets a lot worse and you're not playing Eosmon because Eosmon is just not that great of a deck.
Yeah.
Part of the problem with it is it just doesn't have enough good removal. But in this format where removal doesn't necessarily matter, there's still other ways that other decks can remove its threats while literally not doing anything. So I think like out of all of the options left, like green hybrids is just the best deck, and I don't think it's like super tier one. I think it's like tier two, but it definitely helps keep green playable.
Yeah. It's definitely the most competitive green deck we've seen in a while, genuinely. Like since maybe probably BT4. Um, I'm not 100% sure where I think it'll end up, because I know, like you mentioned, I didn't even think about how you could off color with the red eggs, because um, I guess green's biggest problem has always been that it doesn't have that punch unless you're running like, you know, the promo. Was it? It's not Herc. Promo Kabuterimon, and um, without that like OTK turn Chaosmon, um, then they really didn't have anything. It was kind of all of their tools and their dedication was to playing with the opponent's board or just being cheap in like efficient, and it just wasn't as like uh, beneficial to them. Being cheaper and being more efficient with your evolutions doesn't necessarily matter in a format where the best deck only evos from 3 to 6 or 7. So um green's kind of just been in the wayside. But with running red eggs, that's actually I didn't really think of that. It's really
I
good.
think a lot of people thought of that, but like it was just something like it goes to like how splashable certain colors can be because like you have Pokemon, you have Tentamon, like you have all these good on play cards. You have a new Betamon, so it's like there's no real reason for you to Digivolve on top of your egg. So if you could use that for like a spicy tech, that just might actually make green a little bit more playable. Yes, it's only playable in the context of using other colors cards, but still like it just shows the power of like hard playing cards isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. You could still evo them, and then tamers are basically extra rookies, so it adds to the overall consistency for a deck that has multiple different ways to digivolve. So it just really shows the flexibility on how hybrids can be played and what we could do and the type of experimentation we could see.
Yeah. And especially if you're someone who's still playing green and who's played green through BT5 through BT6, then I feel like you're really grasping to just be competitive in some way, regardless of which way that is. So honestly, like I'll take it. Like other decks have been abusing like these off-colored eggs for a while to gain, access to cards that they technically shouldn't be able to run in their like lists. And if green needs to do that to adapt, then I'm all for it. I'm all for green being competitive again.
Yeah, on top of the fact that green is one of the other colors that has more hybrids than, well, some of the other colors. Like outside of blue and red, green has the second most hybrids just because BT6 had hybrid support. Their ancient is like their secondary ancient is pretty good. Obviously, they want to play Ancient Beetlemon as their primary, but Ancient Troymon is still a very powerful card to shut off certain lines of play. And then you still have Nidhoggmon just in case as a good backbone. So like there's still good things that green can do as a whole. Um, and I think that's just what makes it like actually a really good deck to play as the primary green deck.
So I guess we could go back to purple. I know we mentioned like using Chaos or Lucimon is Lucimon's one of the few cards that does interact with Tamers. So the purple decks that run Lucimon don't have to necessarily be the hybrid decks, but they sometimes are. Like I guess purple really just still has that flexibility. You can either run pure hybrid, hybrid, Lucy, hybrid, like traditional. You can like they have that flexibility to where they don't need to run like a full committed hybrid package to be a hybrid deck.
Because like it's literally a 3 card package. Old Lucimon, new Lucimon, and then the new option card for purple that just lets you play your Lucimons. Like that's literally all it needs, and the new Lucimon is just very, very powerful. The weird thing about the new Lucimon is you could actually digivolve it into a level 6. So that also adds to his overall playability.
Hmm, that's interesting. I don't know why you ever would, but it's there. Yeah, nothing says it can't. Um,
Yeah, because like the old Lucimon literally says this card can't digivolve unless it's into another Lucimon, which the new Lucimon can digivolve on top of the old one, but it's just better to play both from the trash because, purple.
yeah, I remember what I was gonna say. So now that we've kind of gone over like the hybrid decks, um, now including green, um, like what's your like, not necessarily your deck you think's the best, but like what are you starting BT7 out with?
I am probably going to be starting BT7 out with, unfortunately, red hybrids. I know, stereotypical and cliche, but I am a dirty, filthy aggro player at heart. So turning a card sideways and watching lots of cards go away really turns the smiley face on in my brain. That and turning multiple cards sideways or the same card sideways, like I just like dealing lots of damage relatively quickly. And I think compared to a lot of the other decks, like Red Hybrids probably has the highest damage output just because of how stupid Takuya is. I'm also going to be playing around with Blue Hybrids a little bit, but I'm not super thrilled with how that deck is going to evolve just because the lack of Ice Wall really does force you to rethink your defensive plan, where Red just smacks it really hard and it doesn't care.
Mm. My initial plan is to try and make the black X antibody deck work. I know it's something we haven't talked about yet. We'll have to probably touch on it next week. But if I can't get that to work, then I am much more interested in at least working with purple because I did play purple in BT4. I ran the purple Metal Garurumon list, so I'm at least familiar with like the kinds of toolboxy um, like difficult turns. Like it's something that like other decks really just do lack. I feel where you don't have as many um, impactful plays that you can really make given the cards you're dealt. Once you've got the cards in your hands at least.
Yeah, I think that's kind of why I'm also leaning a little bit more towards red because it does have some of those difficult turns just because like Takuya, like I hate to harp on Takuya on being such a stupid card, but he is just that good of a card that just enables you to do various different things and makes you actually think about how you're playing your cards, which is a really good thing because that shows the skill in how you could play the deck.
Yeah, I think it's probably the deck the most skill or the highest skill ceilinged aggressive deck that we've seen so far.
Next to blue, because like blue you have to do a lot of evaluations on how you're going to be attacking, what you're going to be attacking with, when you should be attacking. Red is a little bit more simpler when it comes to that, but like now it's leaning more towards that territory where you actually have to think about your turns.
Yeah, I guess like outside of Gabu Bond with 4 Ice Wall, like the amount of choices you have to make on those turns is significantly higher, but minus, you know, excluding that from the rankings, I feel like it's one of the more choicey, like aggressive decks to be run. Um, I'm actually also really interested in green, only because I did play green prior to BT4, and um, after like the restriction of hidden potential in Argomon level 5, um, and just really looking at like the mush that green got for the next couple sets from Japan kind of turned me off, and it at least made me start looking around because I had only played green up until the start of BT4, and now I feel like I've experimented with like a wealth of colors. I think the only color I haven't like exclusively played in like a competitive tournament setting would be red at this point. I never actually played Jesmon in a tournament or anything. So, um, but besides that, I've played around with other colors in their decks. So, um, I guess that's the good thing about green is that it was so bad it let me try other colors.
I mean, green wasn't bad. It just really didn't evolve. It didn't change. Like going from green BT4 to green BT5, there was like almost no difference. It's like, cool, you get more Digiburst cards to make your cards a little bit better. Whoop-de-doo. BT going into BT6, green got basically nothing. And
Yeah.
that was a huge hit to green's overall playability. It was like you get Ancient Trimon and then the green hybrids, and literally everything else could be forgotten about.
Yeah, it's almost all of its slots were dedicated to AL spawn support. So, yeah, screw that deck. But, um, yeah, I'm just really interested in like, um, what we're actually gonna see across the table too. You know, like, as much as like um, people don't like um, one deck formats. I don't believe this will be, and I'm more hopeful for the future than ever really before. Um, now that we really get to experience treading new ground, you know, as we've always used Japanese data, and it's always only been slightly helpful. Like we'll have a skeleton that will then adapt using our own philosophies and our own play styles. But now we're truly kind of on our own. Like the shells of the deck, the meta functions entirely differently without the constant threat of Ice Wall, the constant threat of like a Susanomon.
Yeah, not to mention like best of ones versus best of threes is a huge change.
Yeah,
Like that's what made Jesmon underperform here and overperform there. Just because the amount of times you need to see that perfect stack or just get into Jesmon is a lot harder in a best of three consistently than, and it requires you to do it more times than in best of one. So
yeah.
like just in a 3 round event, you're already doubling the amount of times you need to fully do Jesmon combo in order to actually win the event, and sometimes Jesmon can't
Mhm.
get there.
Yeah, I know we also didn't touch on Jesmon, but there's still plenty to talk about with BT7. But I think this
Oh
is
yeah,
a
this is just the start of it.
yeah, I think this would be a good place to wrap it up for now. Um, so I guess just a quick parting. What's your favorite card like thematically? Not necessarily the art. If you want to use the art, you can. What's your favorite card thematically of this set?
Thematically, it's probably gonna have to be Cherubimon, just because like there's a lot of lore built into his ability that people probably don't understand unless they watched Frontiers. So like Digimon's always had lore in their card abilities, which is why Lord Nightmon is able to do Lord Nightmon things. It's why Dynasmon does what Dynasmon does. Like there's lore reasons behind some of these abilities, and that's kind of why I love Cherubimon because he's fitting on theme with rewarding me for knowing Digimon lore from the show.
Yeah, I've always liked like references like that. Um, mine's mine's less on the nose like that. Um, I'd probably have to say it's Tommy right now. Have like with the amount of playtesting I've done so far, I just really like that you can just like I was a big fan of the Hexablau archetype while I never actually like really played it too much because it wasn't too great. Um like I definitely really like the idea of a blue control-y like delete your sources and then you can't attack and Tommy's that in one card. So it allows me to play blue and still do that without having to run all these cards that are just worse.
No, I agree. Tommy's an absolutely fantastic tamer.
And I know as you said like he was definitely kind of slept on in favor of Koji. in the Japanese format, and we might just see people gonna come out the gate with the BT7 list that include like 3 or 4 Tommy right immediately.
I totally would because um going back to Tommy, like the longer he saw play, the longer he was in the meta, the more he saw play in a lot of blue hybrid decks. So like even going into BT8, people started shifting more towards Tommy rather than Koji, and we could see that even in Japanese data for EX02 Digital Hazard, and yeah, like it just shows that that card is really good.
Yeah, and just the like you know big fan of like I mentioned I think last episode like the story that isn't told. I guess that was the beginning of this episode. Um, just the idea that like if Tommy was seeing like increased play rates over time and in like these increased play rates were then supported by higher win rates, which encouraged them to play more of Tommy. Like the decks that played more Tommy won more frequently in a format that was so limited by its deck space because they were running 4 Hammer Spark and 4 Ice Wall, and Tommy was still worth 3 or 4 slots. So now that that's removed, Tommy definitely, because I don't even know if we mentioned it, but you probably just replace Ice Wall with like Howling Memory Boost, or I guess Hammer Sparks that you weren't necessarily running, even though every single national deck ran 4 Hammer Spark and 4 Ice Wall.
Right. I think because deck space is going to be a little bit more tighter, depending on how you're building your blue deck, I think Howling Memory Boost is definitely going to see the replacement for Ice Ball. The ironic thing is, like, going back to ban replacements, Yellow doesn't really have a good replacement for Reinforced Memory Boost because nothing really does that. Like, you could say Holy Wave, but, like, not every Yellow deck is going to play Holy Wave because they don't need it.
Yeah, it it's not really a direct comparison either because um my the thing that I like to point out with reinforced memory boost, it was also the only memory boost thus far that gained you 3 memory. It was, a tamer in a package itself, which allowed those decks to not necessarily need to run a tamer if they ever needed access to 3 memory.
Right.
So,
But yeah, this is definitely going to be some really interesting times ahead of us, and I am actually super excited for BT7. It might sound like a total drag with the reduced interactivity because of just how tamers function and like hybrids support that type of a play, but it's going to be a lot more interesting because it forces us to come up with more creative solutions.
yeah, a lot of decks will or at least players too will struggle with the idea that like what am I supposed to do to combat these if not just becoming the villain so to speak of like I could just run the tamer decks and then I can be the problem, and a lot of people probably will honestly like um I do feel like people were riding that high of like flavor of the month be the best deck in the format, and now that that's a little bit more up in the air I think at least at the beginning we're going to start out with a much wider net. People are going to really like latch on to different things that they think are the best deck because we really just don't know. We have no clue what the best deck is. I can't tell you right now whether if red hybrid or yellow hybrid or blue hybrid or green red egg hybrid, black X antibody, purple Lilith. So, like I can't tell you which deck is the best deck. I really don't. Like and that's just looking at the fact that like we are in completely like new ground.
Right, and this is kind of where like tier lists are a little bit disingenuous, and I think Digimon tier lists should be thought up a little bit differently just because of how many meta playable decks there are in the format, and as the game continues to expand, so does that net of meta playable decks. Like, yeah, you're going to see your new deck of the week just because it's the new deck of the week, but that doesn't stop like older decks from being playable. Like I still think Gabu Bond is going to be playable. I still think Jesmon's going to be playable. I think like even Imperial Jamon could still be playable if it's adapted correctly. Like like you said, we are just in uncharted territories, and Digimon is a very different beast of a game than a lot of other games.
Yeah. So I think that's where we'll end it for this week, and we'll join you again next week with a continuation on BT7.
a wonderful day, everyone, or night, whenever you're listening to this.
Bye.